really great to have John Holloway here at Marxism, engaging in this very important debate. John is one of the most important theorists of the contemporary struggles against global capitalism, and he's also made a very important contribution over the last 30 years or so to the Marxist understanding of the state and of capitalism. So it's great to have him here and to be able to discuss with him. I also want to stress the point of agreement that exists between us. We agree that the state is a specific form of the capital relation. In other words, of the relationships of exploitation, competition and domination that define capitalism as a society. Hence, the state is part of the problem, it's not part of the solution. And to put it more specifically, the state is our enemy, and the failure of the mainstream left in the 20th century, both social democratic and Stalinist, to understand that helps to explain why the history of the left in that century was so catastrophic. Secondly, we agree that the impulse for revolutionary change comes from below, not from above. Now, I think that those points of agreement are central to the classical Marxist tradition. When Marx talks about socialism as the self-emancipation of the working class, when Marx says that socialist revolution must involve smashing the modern capitalist state, these are expressions of the extent to which we're in agreement. But let me take us to the key point of disagreement, which is that Freudian slip, John thinks you've won the argument already. John thinks that it's a mistake to confront the question of political power, and that it will, doing so, will lead us to, as so much of the left did in the 20th century, reproduce the forms of domination we find in capitalism. Here's a subsidiary argument that the whole development of the contemporary anti-capitalist movement is in his direction, is in avoiding the question of political power. I think that that's quite disputable, but I mean there are all sorts of problems with what's happening in particularly Venezuela and Bolivia at the present time, but it doesn't seem to me you can accurately characterise this as a situation in which movements are ignoring the question of political power, because in both those countries you have governments that present themselves at least as part of the anti-capitalist left and have a very important relationship to those movements. But I don't have time to explore those questions. Anyway, what John thinks that we should do is, as he puts it, to live now the society that we want to create. In other words, rather than developing a global struggle against the capitalist system concentrated in the form of the state, that we should seek to create and widen cracks in the tissue of capitalist domination. Now, as he puts it, now it's absolutely true. If you look at the whole history of the struggle against capitalism, cracks have opened up at various points in history. John talks about the recent ones, but there are many others. Sometimes the cracks develop through revolutionary means, most importantly the Russian Revolution of October 1917. Sometimes they develop through reformist means. I mean, social democracy is in a sense an attempt, when it's to the extent that it's ever successful, to create at least areas of life, or partially to create areas of life in which the logic of capital doesn't fully reign, and sometimes social democracy has been able to achieve quite a lot in that direction. If we think of Red Vienna in the interwar period, the extent to which a very powerful social democratic movement sought to reshape Vienna in the interests of the working class, that's an example, an old example of cracks opening up. The problem is that capitalism is a global system that operates according to a remorseless and hierarchical logic that means, particularly when it's in trouble, when it faces crises, it seeks to close those cracks, to reimpose its domination on the areas of life or the geographical areas where its logic has partly been broken down. And surely part of the historical significance of neoliberalism is that it represents a sustained effort to subordinate every geographical part of the world and every sphere of our lives, including life literally, biology, our genes, our spiritual and intellectual lives, to the logic of capital. So cracks exist, cracks develop, but capital drives to close those cracks down. And if we want instead to widen the cracks until they embrace the whole globe and capitalism has been destroyed, we have to address the question of political power. Now, why is that? Partly that's from a very common sense point of view, that we could say we're going to ignore the state. That doesn't mean that the state is going to ignore us. On the contrary, in the era of neoliberalism, what we find behind this rhetoric of the free market and all that sort of stuff is the relentless expansion of state surveillance. We live in the, London is the global capital of CCTV. We can't make a move. Think of all the images that there must be of us wandering around, during Marxism over the past few days, for example, if you want to get paranoid about that sort of thing. Think of, but very seriously, the growth of anti-terrorism legislation and the repression that legitimates. When we're able directly to challenge the very citadels of capitalist power, we invite the most vicious repression. The G8 summit is about to take place in Japan, and they put it in a place where it's even more inaccessible than it was when it took place in Scotland three years ago, to prevent the demonstrators from getting anywhere near it. But when we do get near it, then we feel the full force of the state, as we did, for example, in Genoa. And therefore, what that means is that if we want to break the logic of capital, and that ultimately means breaking it at the literally low global level, we have to confront the state, because the state is the most concentrated form of capitalist power. There's also a subsidiary argument that even in the short term, John says, John quotes Keynes, in the long run that we're dead. Well, also, let's think about the short term. When we're fighting in the short term, both resisting neoliberalism's attempt to take back the reforms that have been achieved, but also seeking to extend the scope of reform, again and again, we're making claims on the resources that exist in capitalist society. And the most straightforward way of, through collective action, gaining more of those resources for living decent lives is through putting demands upon the existing state, upon the state that is our enemy. And that's why there's struggles about general strikes, if you're really lucky, and sometimes quite big strikes like the public sector strike that's coming up here in Britain, that involve putting demands on the state about issues such sometimes wages, but also pensions, health service, and so on and so forth. But more fundamentally, in the longer term, any real movement for self-emancipation will run up against the state as the ultimate line of defence of capitalist domination. And to succeed, the movement will have to both mobilise the collective strength of workers and other sections of the oppressed and exploited, mobilise them in the most advanced possible democratic forms, and at the same time concentrate this strength on removing the roadblock of the state. And